Please, don't close your eyes. Stay with me.
Jack's hands trembled as he covered the billionaire's son with his only blanket. The room was freezing, and the candle's flame danced against the cold wind seeping through the cracks. John's face had turned pale, his body shivering uncontrollably. Jack knelt beside him and whispered, "Please, don't close your eyes. Just stay with me."
It was supposed to be just another winter evening, but on this particular day, the nights looked angry, snow falling endlessly, wind cutting through the streets like a blade. Most people were safe in their homes, heaters humming softly, lights glowing behind closed windows, but not everyone. Somewhere near the outskirts of town, a young man stood shivering beside a broken-down car. His name was John, son of the billionaire Zebedee Langston, a man who owned half the city's industries, a name that echoed power and money. But that night, John wasn't the rich man's son anymore. He was just a lost soul, stranded, cold, and forgotten. He had argued with his father earlier that evening. "You think money solves everything," John had shouted. "You never listen, Dad. You don't even know me." And just like that, he had stormed out of the mansion, grabbed his keys, and sped away in anger, straight into the blizzard. Hours later, his car skidded on ice. The engine gave out, and now he was stuck in the middle of nowhere. No signal, no passing cars, just darkness and cold. He wrapped his arms around him, teeth chattering. Minutes turned into hours. He tried to walk, but his legs felt weak. The storm grew harsher. That's when he saw it. Faint lights flickering in the distance. A small shack, barely standing against the wind. John stumbled toward it, each step heavier than the last. By the time he reached the wooden door, he could barely knock. The door creaked open, and there stood Jack, a young black boy, maybe 18, with worn clothes and kind eyes that immediately widened at the sight of John. "Hey, you okay, man?" Jack's voice was rough, but warm. John tried to speak, but his lips were frozen. He only managed a faint whisper, "Help, please." Without hesitation, Jack pulled him inside, shutting the door tight against the storm. Inside, it was small. Broken furniture, a weak fire struggling to stay alive, and the smell of old wood. But it was shelter. "Sit here," Jack said, throwing an extra blanket over him. "You're freezing, man. Hold on." John looked around in disbelief. He had never seen poverty up close. The room screamed struggle, yet Jack's eyes carried peace. "I'll fix you something hot," Jack added, moving toward a rusty pot. "Ain't much, but it'll warm you up." John watched silently as Jack boiled some water, mixed it with powdered milk, and handed it over in a chipped cup. It wasn't fancy, but that moment, sitting on that cracked chair, sipping that warm drink, felt like the most human thing John had experienced in years. "Why'd you help me?" John asked finally, his voice trembling. "You don't even know me." Jack smiled faintly. "You didn't need to be known, brother. You just needed help. That's enough." Something about those words hit John deep. He felt tears sting his frozen eyes. For once, someone didn't care about his name, his money, or his mistakes. Just him. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside that little shack, two worlds had just met. One rich in wealth, but poor in warmth. The other poor in possession, but rich in heart. John didn't know it yet, but that night would change his life and his father's forever.
The storm outside only got louder, howling through the cracks in the old wooden walls. But inside Jack's small shack, a strange calm filled the air. The fire popped weakly, throwing shadows on the walls. John sat closer to it, rubbing his hands together, still trying to believe what had just happened. Jack was humming softly, a tune old and soulful, maybe something his mother once sang. His hands moved gently as he placed some bread on a metal plate, warming it by the fire. John's stomach growled. Embarrassed, he looked away. "Don't worry, man," Jack chuckled, handing him the bread. "Ain't fancy, but it's fresh. Got it from a bakery that gives away leftovers. They toss what they can't sell, and I don't like seeing food go to waste." John took it, hesitated, then nodded in thanks. He bit into it. It was cold, dry, but somehow tasted like care. For the first time, John noticed Jack properly. His shirt was torn at the sleeves, and his shoes were barely holding together. Yet the boy's smile never faded. There was warmth in his eyes, the kind that wealth could never buy. "You live here alone?" John asked quietly. Jack nodded. "Been on my own since I was 15. My mom passed, and my dad, well, he left long before that." "I'm sorry," John whispered. Jack shrugged. "It's okay. Life don't always give you choices, but you learn to keep going. I clean yards, fix things for people, sometimes paint houses, anything that gets me through." John felt the lump in his throat. He thought of his own life. A mansion with 20 rooms, food wasted daily, a father too busy to talk, and parties he never cared about. Yet here was a boy who had almost nothing, and still had more peace than he'd ever known. Jack looked over. "You didn't say how you got stuck out there." John hesitated. "It's complicated. I was angry at my dad. We argued, and I left. Guess I thought driving off would make me feel better." Jack smiled knowingly. "And now you're here, freezing your rich bones off." John laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "Yeah, guess life has a funny way of humbling us." The laughter faded, replaced by silence. The kind that feels honest. The kind that connects people without words. Then Jack said something John would never forget. "You know, man, I don't think rich or poor really matters. When the cold hits, it don't care who you are. When you're hungry, pain feels the same. The only thing that separates us is how much we care for each other." John looked at him, speechless. Nobody had ever said something like that to him, not even his father. Suddenly the fire flickered, and the room dimmed. Jack sighed. "Guess we're out of wood." John jumped up, eager to help. "I'll go get some." Jack stopped him. "You? You'll freeze to death in that wind. Sit down, I got this." He put on his thin jacket and stepped into the storm. The wind almost pushed him back, but he didn't hesitate. Through the window, John could see Jack's small figure battling the snow to gather a few sticks from behind the house. Minutes passed. Then more. The storm grew heavier. John's heart began to race. "He's been gone too long," he muttered, standing up. He opened the door. The cold hit him like knives, but he pushed through it. "Jack, where are you?" And then he saw it. Jack, struggling to lift a fallen branch, his hands shaking from the cold. Without thinking, John ran to him, grabbed the branch, and together they hauled it back inside. When they got in, both of them were breathless, drenched and laughing. "Guess I'm not as soft as you thought," John teased. Jack grinned. "Not bad for a billionaire's son." They rebuilt the fire together, and as the flames rose again, so did something new: respect. Two boys from two different worlds, finding warmth not just from fire, but from friendship. That night neither of them spoke much after that. But as John lay on the old couch under a thin blanket, he realized something powerful. Sometimes the poorest man can be the richest in heart. He drifted to sleep to the sound of the wind outside and Jack's gentle humming. Tomorrow, life would change, but neither of them knew how deeply.
Morning came slow and pale. The snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a world wrapped in white silence. Inside the shack, the fire had died out, but the warmth from the night still lingered. John woke to the sound of clattering. Jack was outside, chopping wood with a small, blunt axe. His hands were red and sore, his breath clouding the air. Yet he moved with quiet strength, as if hard work was just another form of prayer. John stood by the window for a while, watching him. Something stirred in his chest, admiration, maybe even guilt. He had grown up surrounded by people who did everything for him. Yet here was someone fighting through every day with no one but himself, and still smiling. Jack came back in, his face bright despite the cold. "Morning, man. You sleep okay?" "Yeah, thanks to you." Jack shrugged. "Ain't nothing. I just do what anyone should do." But John knew better. Not everyone would open their door to a stranger in the middle of the night. Not everyone would share their last piece of bread. He smiled faintly. "You saved my life, Jack." Jack laughed, shaking his head. "Nah, you just needed a reminder that life ain't about the noise in them big houses." Those words sunk deep. Meanwhile, miles away, chaos brewed in the Langston mansion. Zebedee Langston, John's father, hadn't slept. His son's car had been found abandoned near the old highway, doors unlocked, no sign of him. The storm had swallowed everything in sight. Police and private security had been searching all night, still nothing. Zebedee sat by the window, staring into the falling snow, his heart heavy with regret. He replayed his last argument in his mind, the anger, the words he wished he could take back. He was a billionaire, yes, but right now, his money couldn't buy him the one thing he needed most, his son's safety. He picked up the phone again, calling his head of security. "Search every cabin, every corner," he ordered. "I don't care what it takes, just find my boy." Back in the shack, John sat with Jack over another simple breakfast. Bread and warm water. It wasn't much, but it felt right. Real. Human. "So, what's next for you?" Jack asked. I hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know. I guess I need to go back home, face my father." Jack smiled. "And do it. Whatever it is, it's still your dad. Don't let pride keep you apart." John nodded slowly. "You sound like you've been through a lot." Jack chuckled. "Enough to know that holding grudges don't fix nothing." John's eyes softened. "You're wise, Jack." Jack shrugged. "Nah, just broken enough to see things clearly." Before John could respond, the faint sound of a helicopter echoed in the distance. Both of them looked up. Jack stepped outside first, squinting at the sky. "Looks like someone's out searching. Probably for you." John's heart skipped. "You think so? Ain't many folks missing after a storm like that." Minutes later, two men in black coats appeared through the snow, running towards the shack. "John Langston," one of them shouted. "Your father sent us. We've been looking all night." Jack stepped back, his smile fading slightly, as if reality had just walked in and reminded him of their differences. John turned to him, eyes filled with gratitude. "Jack, thank you. I don't even know how to—" Jack interrupted softly. "You already did, man. You made it out alive. That's all that matters." But John couldn't leave like that. He pulled off his gold wristwatch, one worth thousands, and pressed it into Jack's hand. "Please, take it." "Nah, man, I don't need that. Keep your fancy stuff. Just remember there's good out here, too." John's throat tightened. "I won't forget you, Jack. Ever." And he meant it. As the guards led John toward the helicopter, he kept looking back, watching the boy who had nothing, standing in the snow, waving goodbye with a smile. When John finally reached home, his father rushed forward, eyes glistening. "John!" Zebedee's voice cracked. He hugged his son tight, something he hadn't done in years. "I thought you lost you." "I'm fine, Dad. Because of someone you've never met. But should." That night, while the mansion came alive with joy, John sat quietly in his room, staring at the stars through his window. His thoughts were far away, with Jack. He didn't know it yet, but that boy's kindness would soon turn his world upside down and teach his billionaire father the greatest lesson of all.
John woke up with a storm of thought and emotion. He sat quietly in the grand dining room, silver spoons, white napkins, a breakfast that looked more like a feast. But as he stared at the perfectly folded pancakes and golden syrup, all he could see was Jack's small plate of dry bread. Every bite tasted empty. Zebedee, his father, sat across the table, dressed in his usual suit even though he wasn't going anywhere. His face was tired, but relieved. "I still can't believe you're home, son. I thought I'd lost you forever." John nodded slowly. "I'm home, Dad, but someone out there saved me, and you need to meet him." Zebedee looked up from his cup. "Who?" "His name's Jack," John said softly. "He's the reason I'm alive right now." Zebedee frowned. "Jack?" "Yes, a young man. He found me freezing out there. He took me in, gave me warmth, food, shelter, everything he didn't even have for himself." The billionaire leaned back, thoughtful. "You mean a stranger helped you?" "Not just helped me," John said. "He saved me, and he didn't want a dime for it." Zebedee looked away for a long time, his eyes distant. He'd spent decades building empires, signing deals, and surrounding himself with powerful people, yet not one of them had ever done something truly selfless, not without a camera or reward waiting. "Where does he live?" Zebedee asked quietly. John smiled faintly. "You won't believe it till you see it." That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up outside the small, crooked shack where Jack lived. The mansion's driver looked uneasy, like the tires didn't belong on this kind of road, but John stepped out with determination, and Zebedee followed, his long coat brushing against the snow. When Jack saw them approaching, he almost didn't recognize John, now cleaned up, warm, and standing beside a man who looked like royalty. Jack blinked. "John, you made it home." John grinned. "I told you I would, and I brought someone I wanted you to meet." Jack's eyes shifted to Zebedee, whose expression was unreadable. The billionaire extended his hand slowly. "You must be Jack. My son told me everything. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Jack looked hesitant, then shook his hand. "Ain't nothing to owe, sir. I just did what felt right." Zebedee studied the boy closely, his torn jacket, his cracked shoes, the humble courage in his voice. Something inside the billionaire broke quietly. He said softly, "Do you know how rare people like you are, Jack? In my world, kindness is traded like currency. But you gave it freely." Jack looked down, embarrassed. "Sir, I ain't rich, but I figure if I can help, I should. That's what my mama used to say before she passed." There was a silence, the kind that made everyone's eyes soften. Zebedee's throat tightened. He glanced at his son, and for the first time, he realized how much John had learned from a boy the world would overlook. Then the billionaire did something no one expected, not even John. He stepped closer. Looked around the tiny shack, and said quietly, "Jack, how would you feel about working for me? I have a small foundation, and I could use someone with a heart like yours. You'd have a home, a steady income, and maybe a chance to help others the way you helped my son." Jack froze. His eyes widened. "Work for you? Sir, I don't even have much schooling." Zebedee smiled kindly. Kindness doesn't need a degree. John laughed softly. "You'd love it, Jack. Trust me." Tears welled in Jack's eyes, the kind he tried to hide. He nodded, his voice trembling. "If I can use my hands to help others, Then yes, sir. I'd be honored. Zebedee reached out, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. Then it settled. That night, Jack slept in a warm room for the first time in years. He couldn't believe it. A real bed. Heat. Food that didn't come from someone's leftovers. But what touched him most wasn't the comfort. It was the fact that someone saw him. In the mansion's hallway, John watched from the doorway, smiling. His father stood beside him, quietly. "You were right," Zebedee said softly. "Money builds walls. But kindness? Kindness builds bridges." John nodded. "Jack taught me that." For the first time in a long while, Zebedee wrapped his arm around his son. "And you taught me to listen." The snow outside had stopped. The cold had passed. But what remained was warmer than any fire. The kind of warmth that comes from the heart of one poor boy who changed the life of a billionaire and his son.
Jack woke up that morning to the smell of breakfast, real breakfast, drifting through the wide hallway of the Langston mansion. For a few seconds, he thought he was dreaming. Then he opened his eyes and saw it. Clean sheets, soft pillows, and a window that opened to a garden bigger than his entire neighborhood. He sat up slowly, overwhelmed. Just days ago, he was sleeping under a leaking roof. Now he was under the same roof as one of the richest men in the country. But what amazed him most wasn't the wealth, it was the welcome. When he stepped out of his room, a maid froze mid-step. Others stared as he walked by. Whispers followed him down the hallway. Is he the one who saved the boss's son? He doesn't look like the people we usually hire. He's different. He could feel the stares, but he kept walking, head held high. He remembered what his mama used to say, "Son, walk humble, but never small." At breakfast, Zebedee greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Jack. Hope you slept well." Jack smiled nervously. "I did, sir. Thank you again for this chance." Zebedee nodded. "You earned it." John joined them a moment later, patting Jack on the shoulder. "You ready for your first day?" Jack laughed. "Born ready." By noon, Jack had already started helping at the Langston Foundation, the charity arm of Zebedee's empire. The staff looked skeptical at first. He wasn't polished like the others, didn't wear expensive suits or talk in fancy words. But when it came to work, Jack shined differently. He greeted everyone with warmth, listened with patience. He carried boxes others avoided, stayed late to organize food drives, and never once complained. His presence changed the energy around him, like sunshine breaking through clouds. One afternoon, a senior staff member named Clara mocked him openly. "You're not like us," she said, crossing her arms. "You don't belong here." Jack just smiled. "Maybe, but I'm here to make sure those who don't have a place find one." The room went silent. Even Clara didn't have an answer for that. Word began to spread. People started admiring the boy who never stopped smiling, who treated everyone, from janitor to executive, with the same respect. Zebedee noticed it too. For years, he had run his company with discipline and fear. Now, for the first time, his employees were motivated by something else: kindness. One evening, Zebedee called John into his office. "Son," he said quietly, "I've spent millions trying to improve this foundation, and I failed. But that boy, he's done more in 2 weeks with nothing but heart." John smiled. "Because, Dad, people don't follow wealth, they follow warmth." "Then maybe it's time I lead differently." A week later, Zebedee gathered the entire staff in the main hall. Everyone expected a meeting about budgets or projects, but the billionaire walked in holding something small, a photograph of Jack and John from the night they met. He turned to his employees and said, "This young man saved my son when the world froze over. He didn't ask who John was. He didn't care how rich or poor he might be. He simply acted out of love.
And that's the spirit I want this foundation to carry from now on." The hall went quiet. Zebedee looked around and continued, "We've been helping people with our hands, but not always with our hearts. That ends today. From now on, we give with compassion, not calculation." Then, in front of everyone, he handed Jack a small pin, the Foundation's leadership badge. "Jack, you've reminded us of what humanity really means. I want you to be our outreach coordinator. Help me rebuild this house of kindness." The crowd erupted in applause. Jack stood there speechless. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "Sir, I don't even know what to say." Zebedee smiled. "Then say thank you by doing what you've always done, helping others." John stepped forward, wrapping his arm around his friend. "I told you, Jack, this is just the beginning." That night, as the mansion lights glowed softly, Zebedee stood alone by his window, thinking. He had spent a lifetime chasing success, yet the greatest lesson came from a poor boy with nothing to his name. In another room, Jack knelt by his bed and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Not for the mansion, not for the new title, but for the chance to give others the warmth he once longed for. And though he didn't know it yet, his kindness would soon ripple far beyond the mansion's walls, touching hearts he'd never even meet. Because when love is given freely, it never stops traveling.
Months passed, and the Langston Foundation began to look and feel different, alive, honest, and full of purpose. The change started small, but it spread like sunlight. Jack's humble leadership touched everyone. He worked in the office by day, and by evening he was on the streets, feeding the hungry, helping the homeless, speaking to youth who had lost their way. He never saw himself as a boss. He was just one of them. People loved him, the workers adored him, and John, he looked up to him like a brother. But the person most transformed was Zebedee. For the first time in his life, the billionaire wasn't just signing checks, he was walking beside those he helped. He joined Jack during food distributions, talked with struggling families, listened to stories he'd never imagined. And every time he saw Jack smiling through the cold, offering warmth he barely had, Zebedee would whisper to himself, "This boy saved more than my son. He saved me." One cold evening, nearly a year after the storm, the foundation organized a large outreach event. Tents were set up across the city park, food tables stretched endlessly, and volunteers wore bright vests with the words, "Human First." Zebedee stood on the small stage, microphone in hand. Beside him stood John and Jack. The crowd was massive. Hundreds of people, both rich and poor, all gathered not for charity, but for unity. Cameras rolled, but this time Zebedee didn't care about publicity. He looked at Jack and smiled. Then he began. "A year ago today, my son nearly died in a snowstorm. But a young man, this man standing beside me, opened his door, shared his bread, and reminded us what humanity truly means. I thought I was helping him when I offered him a job, but the truth is, he's been helping us all along." Jack tried to smile, embarrassed by the applause. Zebedee continued. "Jack taught me that money can feed the body, but kindness feeds the soul. And because of him, today we launch something special, a shelter for homeless families called Jack's Place." The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers. Jack froze. "Sir, what did you say?" Zebedee turned to him, his eyes full of emotion. "Jack's Place, a home for those who have no home. You'll run it, you'll lead it, because this city needs more hearts like yours." Tears rolled down Jack's cheeks. He covered his mouth, trembling. "Sir, I don't deserve that." Zebedee smiled softly. "You didn't earn it with money, Jack.
You earned it with love." John stepped forward, wrapping his arm around Jack's shoulder. "Told you, brother, you're changing lives." That night, as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Jack walked quietly to the edge of the park. Snow had begun to fall again, soft, gentle, and familiar. He looked up at the sky, remembering the night it all began, the broken car, the knock on his door, the stranger he helped without knowing who he was. Now everything had come full circle. John walked up beside him. "You're thinking about that night?" Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah, funny how the cold that almost took you ended up bringing warmth to so many." John nodded, eyes glistening. "You're the reason people believe again, Jack." Jack shook his head. "Nah, I'm just proof that no act of kindness is ever wasted." A pause. Then Jack added softly, "You know, I used to think God forgot about me when I lost everything. But maybe he was just waiting for a night when someone else would need what little I had." John smiled, his voice barely a whisper. And look what he did with it. Weeks later, the first families moved in to Jack's place. Single mothers, lost teenagers, elderly folks with nowhere to go. They found warmth, food, and love, all because one poor boy once opened his door. Zebedee visited often, not as a billionaire, but as a volunteer. John ran youth programs with Jack, helping others rebuild their lives. The city began to change, not because of wealth, but because of one spark of compassion. And whenever anyone asked Jack how it all began, he would smile and say, "It started on a cold night with a stranger at my door. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed help." Then he'd look at the children playing in the yard, his voice soft and full of gratitude. That's how love works. You give it away, and somehow it finds its way back to you. And maybe that's what life is truly about. Not what we own, but what we give away. Not how high we rise, but how low we're willing to bend to lift someone else. Because one act of kindness, even from the poorest heart, can rewrite the story of the world.